Hey, after a couple weeks, finally got some decent weather on my days off. I had been working, I worked a little bit of overtime, and it just seemed like the nice days were on the days that I worked, etc., etc. We had snow, it was too cold. So finally, this week, Wednesday, Thursday, yesterday, and today, it's like 50, 52 outside and sun, so I can see what I'm doing sanding outside. So I did some not very exciting stuff. I did some sanding and I did some gluing here also. So, first thing I did, not really sanding, but I mentioned it in prior video. I bought some hobby knives with the chisel type tip. And the reason that I got that is because from ringing or layer lines or what have you, some areas of the print are higher than others. It usually happens where there's some kind of a transition in what you're printing. For example, you're printing up this and then it stops here. Usually there'll be a line associated with that as I'm guessing the momentum of the print head changes a bit. So what I decided to do was try the chisel tip and scrape at those lines where I used to try and sand those lines. And sanding, you'll get above it and below it. Whereas I figured with this, it'll get right on the exact line I want. Because it's a flat tip, it'll go so far until it's about level with the surface, and then it won't go down too far. Whereas sanding, I might make a dished area where from like a finger width of putting pressure on the sandpaper, it might take that area down all the way across. So I just thought I'd give this a try and see. I thought might be quicker than sanding too. And I'm fairly happy with the results. Again, sorry for phone camera in one hand and white plastic. It's not easy to see details, but basically it did a fair job of getting those really high areas lowered. So next I'll have to sand these pieces. These pieces that I did with the hobby knife there, these are the third ring of R2D2's body. It consists of these three parts: the part that has the two utility arms in it, and then there's two short pieces also. One thing, this piece prints like this, and so you get a messy overhang, so I'm not too concerned about that. I will be filling that in with filler material and then sanding that smooth so that by the time I'm done, you hopefully will not even know that printed like that. If you're wondering what these holes are, this is where the utility, or not the utility arms, what is the name for those arms? This is where the other arms that go down the length of his body, one that has like the data port that plugs in and reads the Death Star plans when they're trying to, R2D2 and C3PO are trying to get Luke out of the garbage disposal. And on the other side of the droid has the grabber arm. So maybe those are just called arms, whatever. So that's what these two pieces are, and then this is the back. Now the Mark III, Michael Baddeley's original Mark III design did not have an opening back panel so that you could access your electronics. Now there's a modification where it does. The version of the Mark III body I'm printing, again, is the one that's been cut for smaller printers. It was originally designed for 500 millimeter by 500 millimeter print beds, so you could print the entire body ring as one piece. And then somebody was nice enough to cut it into pieces, so if you have a 300 by 300 millimeter bed, which is more common, you can still print the Mark III design. So that's what those pieces are. They are the top ring. Then I got into doing the legs. These are the outer legs. The first thing I did was glue magnets in. So each, did I call them legs? Feet. These are the foot shells. These go around the feet. Inside go the feet with the drive wheels and the motor. These are where the hoses connect. So this would be facing forward. This would be the left, on the left side of R2D2, the other one on the right side. So you can see the part with all the motor and everything is here, and the battery box. And there's obviously a bit more of the foot. There's another piece that goes here that I didn't get to sand today before I started losing the light. So yeah, first thing I did was epoxy in the magnets. 2 magnets in the foot shell, and then 2 magnets in the cover plate. Now, the reason there's only 1 is because out of the 8 magnets I did, I got 1 flipped around backwards. So I dug it out with an X-Acto, and it kind of messed up the plastic, but it does not matter at all because it is, first of all, the back side of a piece. So I'm just going to glue the magnet in the proper orientation again. And then even though I went through the wall, I will be putting epoxy in there, and it will be filling that, and it'll be fine. And it's not a structural piece, it's just a decorative piece that sticks on to the foot. These can go on either, there's 2 of them that you print and they're the same, so you can stick them on the left foot shell or the right foot shell. There's no difference between this part. I have not trimmed it yet, so it doesn't really fit all that well. I printed it in translucent filament because, again, I was trying to save money, and I had a bunch of filament that I got with my TiVo Tornado printer, including a full roll of transparent filament. And man, you think it's hard to see details on white plastic when you're sanding it, trying to get it smooth. This stuff is just crazy. You can hardly see anything. I mean, you can feel the layer lines, but I can't see squat. So these definitely are going to get a primer coat or a coat of filler before I sand, whereas these ones I'm doing some sanding first. But these I'm just, I don't want to sand anything I'm not supposed to or go too far. But you can barely even see unless I have it held right that there's this raised area along the top, because it just kind of blends in there depending on the angle and the light. So yeah, I wouldn't really recommend transparent filament for printing R2D2 parts, other than the PSIs, the logic lights that go in his dome. Those are supposed to be printed in transparent so the light can shine through. But yeah, any other part that you're gonna sand and paint, transparent is not your first choice, I wouldn't think. It printed fine, but yeah, it's just really difficult to see. For example, this is the part that was on the bed of the printer right here. It does not print flat. They recommend you print it like that, and that has to do with the stair stepping you'll get on these angled parts because the whole thing is full of angled parts, and if you print it at that angle, evidently the angle of printing means that there's less filling work to do overall on the piece. So I printed it like this on the printer with a brim along the bottom, and I think 4 helper discs. I think 1, 2, 3, 4 helper discs, which are just circles that you attach to your print to help the corners stick down. And yeah, printed 2 of them, angled like that with helper discs, and they printed fine. They didn't come off the bed or anything, and as far as I can tell, they printed okay. It's kind of hard to see when it's semi-transparent stuff. So yeah, the bottom there that's what was sticking to the bed. So it's got still bits of the brim on there, so that needs to be sanded smooth. I can sand this back smooth because it's just flat, so that should be easy to get rid of that. And I could probably sand this also before painting. I probably will sand that brim off because again, it's on a flat up to here. It's kind of flat, and if I get real close to it, I don't know if it'll show on the camera, you can see the layer lines, so you can kind of tell where you're not going to go too far. So yeah, using Gorilla Glue, just 2-part epoxy to hold these magnets in. And of course the opposites attract. So I was being very careful, I thought, and got the ones in the feet going the same direction, and then flipped all the ones for these pieces and just somehow got one installed backwards. So I think 1 out of 32 magnets, I think, between the shoulders that have the 4 magnets holding on the horseshoes. So 4 and 4 for the 2 sides is 8, plus the horseshoes, that's 16. And then you've got the boosters on both sides that I think are 2 more magnets. So yeah, it's a fair amount of magnets to have one flipped around backwards. I guess I'm okay with that. I was being careful, but whatever, stuff happens. And the fact that it's in a piece, like I said, where that's like possibly one of the best places you could have one that you have to dig out and glue back in again because it's not structural. The holes were a fair bit larger than the magnets, so it's not like a super tight fit where the magnet barely fits in the hole. So I was able to get a hobby knife in there and dig around the epoxy and take it out without doing too much damage to the plastic. It's a really fairly thick part, so even if I accidentally punched a hole through something there, it wouldn't have mattered because it's so thick. I wouldn't have poked a hole through the other side that would need to be filled because you would see the area. So got kind of lucky, I guess. If I was going to have a magnet I was going to have to take out and put back in, then that's a good place for it to be. I then went over all 4 parts of the footshells with what am I using now? 100 grit? Or is it 80 grit? I think it's 100 grit. 100 grit sandpaper. And went over not all of the surfaces. The layer lines aren't that bad on this. They're really thin. I think that'll be filled in with filler just fine. So that didn't need to be sanded. But down at the bottom, there was areas here that are possibly going to need a little filler because it's a little bit indented in these areas between the fully indented rectangles there. And then elephant's foot. This is where these actually print upside down. They actually print like this on the printer. And the model has built-in supports. Go from here up to here to help hold it in place. And you would think that they would print in this direction, but just because of the angles, I guess, of what it has to print there, they actually print upside down. So yeah, and then I sanded the magnets, the epoxy over the magnets flat. A couple of them didn't take too much. Some of them I put a bit too much epoxy. Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to say. Okay, this is like the last thing I want to say. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I had a little problem with the model here. Okay, focus, please. If you can see the areas where those magnets go in, you'll see the one on the bottom is kind of a reverse pyramid type shape, but the one on the top is different. Now, I don't know why. Perhaps there's part of the drive assembly that goes into this foot that needs that to be flat, or it would bump into it. That could be because you've got that circle over there with a hole in it for a bolt that's also flat. But if you can see, there's 3 areas around that goes all the way through. So what I forgot to do is put some painter's tape on the bottom of that when I was putting the magnets in, because just like one of my other videos when I did magnets, I used this. I put epoxy in the hole and then I pushed that down, and you can feel it push down, and the epoxy comes up from the bottom because you're displacing the epoxy. Well, what I forgot about is after I did that, I did it while I was holding it so it would be level, and then I turned it around and I saw the epoxy oozing out of this area, and I'm like, oh, I forgot I was going to put tape. Now, if I had put painter's tape, the pressure of pushing down on that magnet with the epoxy might have made the epoxy squish out around the tape anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. I just took that rivet I used to push it down and kind of wiped off the excess and moved it back over here to the top. And then I ran and got some painter's tape and covered the area. Made sure that the magnet was recessed and not sticking up high. And it's fine. But just something to remember, unless this is an issue that's been fixed on later revisions. I actually haven't been on the Facebook page for a while because I haven't been doing much work on my R2D2, but for whatever reason, the 2 magnet holes are not the same. This one's different, and if you're epoxying it in, glue is going to ooze out from the bottom, so you want to put some blue painter's tape. I use blue painter's tape just because I've always done that when I'm doing Bondo, body filler, epoxy, because it tends not to stick to it too much. You can see there's 2 little tiny bits of blue tape left here after I took it off, and I can just probably peel that off with my fingernail if it bothered me, but I don't really care because it's on the inside. So it's something that peels off easy, doesn't tend to stick to whatever you're doing on the other side, like epoxy or glue or body filler. So just something to watch out for. Make sure you've got your magnets inserted properly so that things stick together. And watch out for epoxy oozing out of the back because of those 2 holes. Now, the last thing I'll mention, I didn't bring the center foot in here, but the center foot is also has the same type of removable panels, one on each side, but they are not held in with magnets. I thought they were, and that's part of the reason I ordered a stupid amount of magnets. I ordered 100 magnets, and it's turned out that I haven't used half of them. So they were fairly cheap, and who knows, I'll probably use them for something somewhere else down the line. But I miscalculated thinking the center foot used the same method with the same magnets, so that would have been 2, 4, 6, 8. That would have been 8 more magnets that I used. So just be aware that these 5mm thick, 10mm diameter magnets are used in the outer foot shells, but not the center foot shell. Okay, I think that's about it for today. Like I said, I was using like 100 grit paper, so I'll probably go over it quickly with 220 grit paper the next chance I have to work on it, and then maybe glue them together. You can see down at the bottom there's a hole, top there's a hole, top there's a hole. So they look too small to me, but I think they're supposed to be the size of 1.75mm filament. So you can put a piece of filament in there and use it for an alignment peg. But there's also, and I didn't bring it out, but on the back there's a piece that just barely fits on a 300 by 300mm print bed if you print it on a diagonal, that goes all the way from here back to here. And so that's basically finishes the foot, and comes up to, I think, about here-ish? I think it comes up to about here. It just comes part way up, because then you have battery boxes that kind of cover the rest of that open area, so you don't see an open area when you look at R2D2 from any angle there. So maybe if I get those pieces together, I'll glue it together, because gluing it together without and then doing any finishing, sanding, whatever, with this, basically this small area, this one, that's a big enough surface area that'll be glued together, and I might very well do a plastic weld where I take a soldering iron and some excess filament and melt excess filament up the seam to make that stronger. But this piece being so small makes me a bit nervous that it'll just come apart if I'm sanding it or something and I'm a little bit too hard on it. So I might wait until I've got sanded the piece that goes all the way across here, because it bolts in place, and so those bolts and this large area, that should make it strong enough that I can do any sanding or filler application or anything without worrying about this joint coming apart and the thing needing to be glued back together again. Or I guess it doesn't really hurt anything. I could too just put a light coat of filler like I've been doing on everything else, just using the plastic spreader tool, just put some of the filler material on all the visible parts and then glue it together. But glue and bolt, whatever. But there you go. That's the R2D2 outer foot shells. Inside of them goes the drive unit with the wheels and the motor. And the cover pieces, one for the left and one for the right, that face the outside. Now, why did he do these with magnets? I was thinking about that. I'm not sure what the purpose is of having that be magnetically attached and removable, other than the fact that these are the outer foot shells. They stick out right? A fair distance. So this being, if R2 was facing forward, this is the right-hand side. So say you're driving R2 around and you bump into something, the foot's going to be the thing that sticks out the furthest on all of R2D2, the furthest to the sides. So I'm guessing maybe he made this piece with magnets instead of gluing, which you could glue. In fact, if you glue it, it'll make this a lot stronger because it'll help hold the two pieces together. But I'm guessing that maybe he did this because this is the further out part of R2D2, and if you're driving around and you bump into stuff, you might end up damaging the front of the foot. And if you damage the foot, then you can take this off, reprint. I guess you'd have to reprint these two if they're glued together. Reprint both parts of the feet, and you wouldn't have to reprint this because it's removable. Whereas if it was all glued in place and you damaged the foot in the front or the back, now you have to print all of it again, maybe. I don't know. That's just a guess. Like I said, if you wanted to, you don't have to use magnets. You could just glue that thing in there, and it would help hold all that together better. So, and again, hopefully that gap is just there because I have not sanded the piece so it doesn't quite fit in there the way it's supposed to. Haven't sanded these yet. There's all kinds of extra material down here at the bottom. So there we go. A couple weeks without a video, but I actually got some progress done today, so I feel pretty good about that.